on the staff of the, as an associate conference minister on the staff of the Northern California Conference, when I was first introduced to the Wilmington 10 story. And one of the people who did that introduction for me, and over the years I've counted as a friend, was the person handing out the pardons and the signature pens in the video. And he's with us tonight, Professor Herb Joyner. Herb was on the staff of the Commission for Racial Justice of the United Church of Christ, and he was looking for a free trip to San Francisco on behalf of the Commission. And no, really, in all seriousness, the opportunity to enlist allies in the cause of the release and eventual exoneration of the Wilmington 10. And now, today, as I indicated, he's a law professor, University of North Carolina, and it's a North Carolina Central, excuse me. There's some history there, no doubt. It's a privilege to welcome you here. And way back when, in the early 70s, a person that worked with you at the Commission for Racial Justice was none other than Dr. Elsie Scott. And Elsie went on to a distinguished career, Deputy Commissioner in the New York City Police Department, right? And then went to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation as its chief executive in Washington, D.C., and is now at Howard University, and she's here tonight, too. Now, as you can tell, over there on the stage, there's 3 chairs. And Elsie's going to be Oprah and do some interviewing of Irv, but it's my special treat to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chase.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to be here today and to thank Reverend Deckenbach and Reverend Reed for inviting me here. When Reverend Reed first called me and he said, "We want you to participate on the panel with Herb Joyner and Ben Chase." And I said, well, their contribution to Wilmington 10 is so much higher than mine, so why don't I interview them? So that's how we came up with me being the Oprah of the panel. So I'm very happy to have these 2 very distinguished panel members here. They've already been introduced, but I have a little bit more to say about them that we want to start with. I call them the sons of Reverend Dr. Charles Cobb. And some people in the room here know who Dr. Cobb was. He was the executive director of the Commission for Racial Justice. And he was the power behind all of us. We were his children. But these were probably his 2 favorite sons here. And so even though Dr. Cobb has joined the ancestors, we know his spirit is here tonight with his 2 sons. His son on my left is Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chase. And let me just tell you about some of the things he's done, because, you know, a lot of you don't know anything about him except that he was part of the Wilmington 10. He was the co-founder with Russell Simmons of the Hip Hop Summit Network, which is the world's largest coalition of hip hop artists and recording industry executives. He's now the current president of Education Online Services Corporation, which is the world's leading provider of online higher education for historically black colleges and universities across the United States, as well as academic institutions of higher learning throughout the world. Dr. Chavis began his career as a youth coordinator for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In 1970, he was appointed the Southern Regional Program Director of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. And that's how Ben became part of the Wilmington 10. In February 1971, he was sent to Wilmington, North Carolina to support the high school students and young activists in their protests against school desegregation, around school desegregation. And you know the story of the Wilmington 10. And it ended up with, a year later, Ben being charged along with the other 9. And he was given the lengthiest sentence of them all, 34 years. While in prison, he didn't just sit there in prison. He earned a Master of Divinity from Duke University. He had already earned a Bachelor in Chemistry from the University of North Carolina. And after he was released, he came to Howard University and earned a Doctorate of Ministry. He went on to Union Theological Seminary in New York and completed the coursework for a PhD in systematic theology. And he eventually became the executive director, followed in the footsteps of Dr. Cobb, became the executive director and CEO of the Commission for Racial Justice. And he's authored some books. You can read more about that. You just Google him. Our other special guest here is Irvin Joyner. As you've already heard, he's a professor of law at North Carolina Central University. He's formerly served as an associate dean there at the law school. He teaches courses in criminal law, criminal procedures, and other topics. And he's written 3 editions of his book on criminal procedure in North Carolina. But I think most importantly here tonight is that he is a committed attorney. He does pro bono legal counsel to several political, religious, and community organizations and to needy people throughout North Carolina around civil rights and criminal cases. His connection to the Wilmington 10. When the Wilmington 10 were arrested, Joyner was working in the New York office of the Commission for Racial Justice, where he was directing their national criminal justice and civil rights programs. And he was part of the strategy of deciding how the church was going to be engaged, organizing organizations around the country to get involved in the Wilmington 10 case. And he went on to law school. And while he was still a law student, he worked with James Ferguson, who was the lead attorney on the case on the legal side of the case. And he continued to work tirelessly on this case, and eventually he became the lead attorney for the pardon portion of the case. He's a graduate of Long Island University in Brooklyn, New York, and his JD came from Rutgers University. Okay, let's just start a little conversation here. Oh, let me just mention also, some of you might have seen him this morning. You watch MSNBC. He was on the Melissa Harris Perry show talking about what is happening in North Carolina now. And so during the reception, you might want to talk with him about some of the things that are happening in North Carolina, because even though the Wilmington 10 have been pardoned, North Carolina is still engaged in taking away people's rights. And but we're here to talk about the Wilmington 10 right now. Okay. Ben, why don't you just tell us a little bit about why you were in Wilmington, North Carolina on February 6, 1971, and what did you intend to accomplish when you were sent there?
Thank you, Elsie. And first and foremost, I want to say to all the members of the Central Atlantic Conference of the United Church of Christ, on behalf of all of the members of the Wilmington 10, want to express our sincere gratitude to all of you for your prayers and for your support and for something that's in our statement of faith about the cost and the joy of discipleship. I cannot tell you that the road that Wilmington 10 had was easy. It was somewhat difficult. But I have to tell you that even in those difficult moments, knowing we had your prayers, knowing we had your support, helped sustain the members of the Wilmington 10 through this 40-year struggle. So I just want to begin, I answer Elsie's question, but I just want to begin by first giving a word of gratitude to all of you, and long live the United Church of Christ. In February of 1971, keep in mind what was happening, not only in Wilmington, but in our nation. Richard Nixon was the president. Spiro Agnew was the vice president. And in the wake of Dr. King's assassination in 1968, 3 years later in 1971, there was this whole struggle in the South around education, around equal education, equal access to education. Some say it's desegregation versus integration, but it really was about treating every child of God fairly, without discrimination, without barriers to race or any other circumstance. And such was the case in Wilmington. Wilmington, North Carolina was one of the last cities in the state to desegregate. We all know about the 1954 Brown decision, saying that unequal schools were unconstitutional. Unequal and separate schools were unconstitutional. But by 1971, the schools were still segregated. NAACP and others went and got a suit. The federal court agreed and forced desegregation. That was the context. That's why I was in Wilmington. Sent by Dr. Charles Cobb, sent by the Commission for Racial Justice of the United Church of Christ. We responded to a plea for help from Reverend Eugene Templeton, who was the pastor of Gregory Congregational Church in Wilmington on Nunn Street. Gregory Congregational Church was a black UCC congregation. Reverend Templeton was a young white pastor just out of seminary, sent to Wilmington, called by the congregation. And he had received threats because he had opened up the church to the students who were organizing to try to get fair treatment in the school system, and organizing to try to save Williston High School, which was the black high school that had been downgraded. So it was a time of controversy, Elsie. That's what led me there. But keep in mind, even though I was 23 years old at that time, I was sort of a veteran of the civil rights movement, since I had been organizing civil rights since I was 12 years old. So by the time I went to Wilmington, I knew what to do, how to do it, and my really concern was helping protect those students, as well as Reverend Templeton and his wife, who were under constant threat, just because they were having meetings in the church, mass meetings. Gregory Congregational Church became the focal point of our organizing, of our presenting the grievances of the students. But it also became the focal point of the wrath of those who were opposed to school desegregation, namely the Ku Klux Klan, namely a paramilitary white supremacist group called the Rights of White People, who physically attacked the church. We were the targets of the violence. We were never the perpetrators of violence, but yet the state indicted us as a result of what happened at Faithful Week in February of 1971.
Now, Irv, you were in New York City, and so if you could share with us what was happening at the national office of the Commission for Racial Justice. What were some of the conversations that were held, and did Dr. Cobb feel personally responsible for being getting arrested and for the other young people getting arrested?
Thank you, Elsie, for that question. Let me, like Dan, extend my gratitude and thanks to you all as members of the United Church of Christ for giving me the opportunity to work for your church, pursuing equal justice and political equality for racial minorities in this country. I started with the Commission for Racial Justice in 1968, when the commission was then the Committee for Racial Justice. And Dr. Cobb had this vision that there would be a team of organizers that he would be able to send out into the country, working with local African American communities, working with UCC churches and other congregations that were interested and involved in trying to bring about some equality in the country. And I recall that my first mission for the Commission for Racial Justice was to go to North Carolina to organize a campaign around the freeing of a 16-year-old African American girl who had been convicted of murder in North Carolina and was on death row. And so my first campaign was around dealing with her case and the injustice of that, teaming up with James Ferguson and other attorneys there, resulting in a reversal of the conviction in her case and her freedom, as she was able then to go out and pursue a life for herself. While doing that, we found that 50% of the African American membership in the United Church of Christ was located in North Carolina and Virginia. And a decision was made at that time that we ought to open a field office in North Carolina that would be in a position to service that population. And many of the issues and things that occurred in that community. And the North Carolina-Virginia Commission for Racial Justice was born as a result of that. And subsequently, that office employed Ben as its chief organizer in North Carolina. Dr. Cobb saw the Commission for Racial Justice as being a force on behalf of the church to make real the witness and vision that the church had, that all people ought to have the right to be free and have equal opportunity within this country. And he was a proponent of nonviolent organizing. And when Ben was sent to Wilmington, it was with the goal of bringing about some resolution of the issue that was present at the time. Not only was Ben sent on behalf of the commission into Wilmington, but he was specifically requested to go into Wilmington because there was an absence of leadership within the African American community there. And a group called the Good Neighbors Council of the North Carolina State Government begged Reverend Leon White, who was the director of that office, to send Ben down because he was young. He didn't know any better. He had been effective around North Carolina in organizing young people, had a reputation and the respect of young people in the state. And he went into Wilmington, which was in virgin territory, because we had not really been to Wilmington to do anything prior to that time. And meeting then with students that he did not know. And all of these were students. They were 16, 17, and 18 years old. Now you saw them there sometime later in life. But when we met them, they were 16, 17, and 18 years old. And Ben was able to go in there and gain their trust to help to organize them to deal with the injustices of the New Hanover County education system. And but for white radical elements, the Ku Klux Klan and the rights of white people, who literally came into the African American community there and began to shoot it up with machine guns, shotguns. Today on the facade of Gregory Congregational Church, you still find the bullet holes from fire that from these people as they rode by the church and shot into it while the students were in there having their meetings. And in response to that, the leadership of Wilmington blamed the students for getting fired upon, because if they hadn't met, the white people wouldn't have been aroused to want to go into the community and shoot up anybody in the first place. Dr. Cobb felt that he had let Ben and the students down by not providing more protection for them, and not that he could have provided any protection for them at that time. And he then singularly committed the resources of the Commission for Racial Justice and lobbied the larger church to begin a strong witness on behalf of the Wilmington 10, and that led me to Reverend Deckenbach as we went around the country to talk about what was going on in Wilmington. And I'll tell you that your church responded. Your church responded. These were poor people, could not make bail, and the bails were extravagant. And I recall going to General Synod, meeting with the leadership of the church and asking them, will you post bail for the Wilmington 10? And the initial response was no. We don't do that. We don't have those kind of resources. And it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 or $400,000. We were not deterred. So we went to the delegates of the General Synod and had them to put a resolution on the floor that the church should provide bond. And a campaign ensued there in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And at the end of the convention, the United Church of Christ voted and directed the leadership of the church to provide bail for the Wilmington 10. That Monday morning, when we returned to New York, they went straight to the bank and borrowed the bail money. And I can recall, I think it was $350,000 being packed in a suitcase, flown into Charlotte, North Carolina on the Eastern Airlines at the time for James Ferguson and I to pick up, to drive to Burgo, which was like a 3.5-hour drive from Charlotte. And we left early in the morning, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, to make sure that nobody would be able to ascertain the fact that we had all this money with us, and we wanted to be in Burgo when they opened up their office that morning, and we were. And we walked in with this suitcase and laid it on the counter in the church, in the clerk's office, and opened it up, and they almost fainted. But a great, and I know I'm going to make this one point. The church borrowed this money, and because it was the church, they borrowed it at a low interest rate. And the law in North Carolina required the clerk of court to invest the money for bonds in securities. And at the end of the day, the United Church of Christ made money. The United Church of Christ made money because the interest cost to the church was lower than the return that they received from the Pender County Clerk of Courts investment fund that they had. So that was a part of your contribution, and it went on. But that's one. But I really always talk about with respect to the contributions from the United Church of Christ and its importance to the freeing of the Wilmington 10.
Well, Herb answered my next question I had for him. But I think one little known history fact here that would be of interest to those of you in this conference, especially people in Baltimore, is that the attorney for the Commission for Racial Justice at that time was Reggie Lewis. And you know the Reginald Lewis Museum in Baltimore, who eventually became the head of Beatrice Food before he died. Well, he was given doing pro bono work for the Commission for Racial Justice at that time. And I remember you all worked with him to get that bail money to go down there. You used to often tell the story about, you know, he was based at Wall Street attorney, and this was new territory for him, and he was kind of nervous about working on the Wilmington 10 case. But, you know, he was attorney for the Commission for Racial Justice, so he worked closely with Dr. Cobb and with Herb to make certain it happened. Now, to Ben, were you surprised when the church came up with this bail money? What was your reaction?
Well, I had faith in the United Church of Christ. I was not surprised. I knew Robert Moss, who was the president at that time. I knew Charles Lockley, who was the treasurer of the United Church of Christ at that time. And there's something you need to know that Herb is right. The delegates at the General Assembly in Grand Rapids took a vote, but this also was a vote 4 years later at the General Assembly in St. Louis. Because once we initially got out, we were re-incarcerated, and I was arrested several more times for other charges not related to the Wilmington 10, all false charges. And there was one occasion where Herb and Attorney Reginald Lewis had to fly me back to Wilmington on a plane so I could turn myself in. And this was on Piedmont Airlines. We left LaGuardia and landed at Wilmington. And when the plane landed at Wilmington, we noticed all these people standing on the roof of the New Hanover County Airport with rifles. So when the plane landed, everybody got off the plane, including the pilot and the hostess, stewardess, and the three of us were left on the plane. And we had to decide who was walking out of the plane first. So, being a minister of the United Church of Christ, we had prayer. And it was decided that Reggie, since he was the attorney, was going off the plane first. And the sheriff, who was down waiting at the gangplank, you know, you had to, there was time in the middle of the 70s, you had to walk down this gangplank. The sheriff was getting ready to arrest me. I was right behind Reggie. And Reggie put his arm on the sheriff's arm and said, well, who are you? And the sheriff said, well, you don't know who I am? I said, no, I don't know. He said, I'm the sheriff. So Reggie asked the sheriff for his identification. And the sheriff said, nobody asked me for identification in my county. And Reggie Lewis said, well, if you're going to arrest my client, you have to show me your identification. It totally discombobulated. Just like when the people were shocked when Herb and Fergus showed the $350,000. The officials in North Carolina were shocked that a church called the United Church of Christ would have the audacity to put up bail money, would have the audacity to hire lawyers, would have the audacity to send organizers to try to get black students and white students in school together. You have to understand the history, the time, the contemporary time. the United Church of Christ and the local press was called everything but the United Church of Christ. And so, to answer your question, I felt also that when the Committee for Racial Justice became the Commission for Racial Justice, it was the church saying that it was going to take a firm stance. And when I was driving to Wilmington that night, I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to face, but I know I got the United Church of Christ backing me. That's what was in my mind. And thank God the church did keep the faith. And I think at a point, you need to know the Southern Conference of the United Church of Christ was somewhat divided. It wasn't as progressive as the Central Atlanic Conference. But when the Southern Conference heard that the United Church of Christ was making money off of the interest of the debt, you'd be surprised what a point of unity that was for the Southern Conference. It's amazing that money does something with our faith. It's important, but it's not only the amount as been referred to before. It's the why. Why do we do what we do? Not just what we do, but why do we do it? And the fact that we can, express our faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, express our faith as Jesus Christ as liberator, enables people to stand and not just cry out for justice, but believe that God will not only hear prayers, but answer prayers. And so, I was so proud of the young people. Irv mentioned about the young people in Wilmington. Here were young 15, 16, 17-year-old students putting their lives on the line to get an education, to get a high school education. And when the schools became too dangerous to attend, there was a boycott. And we thought it was just going to be the high school students, but even the elementary school students, and the middle schools, and the whole school system was united. And to Reverend Templeton's credit, the pastor of the church, when I arrived at Wilmington, they were kind of out there by themselves, without their parents, without adults. But over a period of time, more parents got involved, and we were actually building a real movement. So I thought also that the support of the United Church of Christ was vital. I never lost hope. When we were sentenced to a combined total of 282 years in prison, we were, let me put it this way, we were not going to let anything break our spirit. Obviously, we did not want to serve all those many years in prison. And we did not know when the doors would open, but it was important while we were in to keep our faith. I have this expression, we didn't serve time, we made time serve us. We tried to keep positive and do things even though we were unjustly locked up at the time.
And I know this is following protocol. Ben mentioned the Southern Conference, and I think that is excellent takeoff point for this one. Irwin Smallwood, who was president of the Southern Conference, was also the editor of the Greensboro Daily Record, News and Record, some newspaper. And because of the controversy within the Southern Conference and the split, because you had all of the progressives within the Southern Conference and African Americans demanding that the Southern Conference would get involved more actively in supporting the Wilmington 10 case. So Irvin Smallwood, without knowledge, consent, collaboration with anyone, assigned one of his reporters to go to Wilmington to look at all the claims that had been made, to interview all the people, and to report back to him what the real deal was in Wilmington. And out of that investigation came one of the groundbreaking news stories about the Wilmington 10 that cemented national and international support for the Wilmington 10. Because when he went down and interviewed all the people involved, he came back with an explosive story which said that the Wilmington 10 were framed, that the prosecutor had engaged in gross prosecutorial misconduct, that there was racial discrimination involved in the jury selection in the case, that the rights of white people and Ku Klux Klan in New Hanover County had attacked regular congregational church and had gone into the community and randomly just fired at and shot people in that community. And that story then became a national item that then went international. The Amnesty International declared that the Wilmington 10 were political prisoners. First time they ever in their history declared that they were political prisoners in the United States. But that grew from the skepticism of some members of the Southern Conference, called Irving Smallwood, to send one of his ace reporters down to do an investigation of what happened. So way back then, we knew, and we were able to demonstrate what it took 40 years later for Governor Perdue to finally realize when she granted the pardon of innocence to the Wilmington 10 men.
I think I was supposed to take a few questions from the audience.
Before you do that, we have a treat in that at the General Synod in a couple of weeks, the Wilmington 10 will be honored once again. And through the collaboration with Joffrey Black and the Office of Communication, we are going to premiere the clip that they're going to use at General Synod to honor you. And Skip, why don't you roll?